Scientists pointed a machine at the Great Pyramid that doesn't use drills, doesn't use light, and doesn't touch the stone. It catches particles falling out of deep space. And what those particles revealed inside this monument is forcing experts to rewrite the one thing about the pyramid we were sure we understood. Not who it was for, how it was built. Because for 4,500 years, nobody could explain how a civilization with no iron, no pulleys, and no wheels suited for the job stacked over 2 million blocks of stone, some weighing as much as 80 tons, into a structure so precise its base is off from a perfect square by mere centimeters and aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree. We were told they dragged the stones up a giant ramp. The problem is, that ramp has never been found. Not a trace of it. And a new theory says the reason we can't find the ramp, the tools, or the machinery isn't that the evidence is missing. It's that the evidence has been sitting in front of us the entire time. We just read it wrong. Today, we're going through exactly what the scanners found inside the Great Pyramid, and the theory that finally makes the missing evidence make sense. Stay with me, because the part that actually explains the how is the part nobody wants to say out loud. Most people who visit Giza never go inside. They photograph the outside, they ride a camel, they leave. The few who do go in walk up a cramped wooden ramp, through a passage barely tall enough to stand in, into a bare granite room. And that's it. That's the tour. Most people walk right past the real mystery without ever knowing it's there. Because the strangest features of the Great Pyramid are not the ones you can walk to. They are sealed. They are buried in solid rock. And until very recently, we had no way to even know they existed. We can't talk about how the pyramid was built without first talking about time, because the pyramids are almost incomprehensibly old. The cliché is true. Cleopatra lived closer to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the construction of the Great Pyramid. The ancient Romans toured these monuments as tourists, the way we tour the Colosseum today. The Great Pyramid was built for a pharaoh named Khufu, completed around 2560 BCE, which makes it roughly 4,500 years old. It stood about 480 feet tall, and it remained the tallest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. Not the tallest in Egypt, the tallest on the planet. And it was not a lucky one-off. It was the end point of a long architectural learning curve, each pyramid before it taking 10 to 15 years, each one teaching the builders something new, each one getting closer to this. And the numbers it ends on are hard to believe. 2.3 million blocks of stone, a base that forms an almost perfect square, off by mere centimeters, across a footprint larger than 9 football fields. A slope held to an angle so precise that even a slight variation anywhere would have meant the 4 edges drifted apart and never met cleanly at the top. Aligned to true north within about 1/15 of a single degree, more accurate than some modern structures, using no compass, no laser, no GPS. As far as we know, they did it by reading the stars. The coincidences pile up to the point of discomfort. Scale the pyramid's height-to-base ratio up to the size of the planet, and it nearly matches the curvature of the Earth. The numbers in its latitude line up eerily with the speed of light. Most of this is almost certainly the human brain finding patterns in noise, the same instinct that makes us see faces in clouds. But it tells you something about the object itself. The Great Pyramid is so precise, and our understanding of how it was made is so thin, that it has become the perfect breeding ground for every conspiracy theory you've ever heard. And yet, if any civilization on Earth could actually pull this off with their own hands, it was the Egyptians. They invented counterweighted lifting devices, star-aligned surveying tools, and one of the most accurate calendars in the ancient world, long before most other peoples could even write. So how does a people with copper tools and no machines as we'd recognize them pull this off? Here is the uncomfortable part. We genuinely do not know. That is not a fringe claim. That is the mainstream position. Even the experts who have spent their entire lives studying this monument admit, when the cameras are off, that the exact method is still a mystery. And what makes that so strange is that the Egyptians documented almost everything else in obsessive detail. This was a hyper-organized civilization built on a single piece of luck. Every year, the Nile flooded the valley and turned it into a surplus machine, producing ridiculous amounts of grain, enough to feed tens of thousands of people who never farmed a day in their lives. That surplus bought them the rarest resources in the ancient world: time, labor, and the political stability to run engineering projects that lasted decades. So, they kept records. We have a 4,500-year-old logbook from a site manager named Merer, documenting, day by day, how his crew floated limestone down the Nile to the Giza site. We have records of who was hired, how the stone was quarried, how it was moved, and even the payroll. And by the way, they were not slaves. That myth has been dead for years. Archaeologists found entire workers' towns at Giza, with bakeries, breweries, workshops, medical teams that set broken bones, and the honored tombs of the craftsmen themselves, buried in the shadow of the thing they built. These were skilled, paid, well-fed labor crews. So we have the food, we have the workers, we have the logistics, the shipping manifests, the wages. We have a paper trail for nearly every part of this project. Everything except the one thing we actually want: the construction drawings. The method. On the single most important question, the most meticulous record keepers of the ancient world left us nothing. The record goes completely silent. Almost as if, when it came to how the pyramid actually rose, somebody decided we were never meant to know. If you find buried history as unsettling as I do, subscribe and turn on the bell, because what comes next is the part that breaks every theory you've been told. Let's start with the theory everyone has heard: the external ramp. Workers drag the blocks up a huge ramp that rises as the pyramid rises. Simple, in theory, but run the numbers and it falls apart. To keep the slope gentle enough that ordinary humans could haul multi-ton stones up it without people dying, the ramp would have to stretch nearly 2 kilometers. Make it shorter or steeper, and the death toll climbs. So now you've built a ramp that uses more material and labor than parts of the pyramid itself, just to build the pyramid. And here's the killer: there is zero archaeological evidence that a mile-long ramp ever existed or was ever torn down. No debris, no foundation, nothing. So people proposed a fix: a ramp that spirals around the outside of the pyramid. Shorter, more compact, reusing the same slope as it climbs. But that creates a new problem, and it's a fatal one. The faces of the pyramid have to be perfectly straight for the edges to meet at the apex. To hold that precise angle, the builders had to constantly check the edges and corners. A fat ramp wrapped around the outside blocks the exact corners they needed to see. You can't build a perfect pyramid while hiding the thing that tells you if it's perfect. So maybe the ramp wasn't outside. Maybe it was inside. In the 1980s, someone watched a fox slip into the Great Pyramid near the base and pop out hundreds of feet higher up. That fox inspired a French architect to propose a hidden internal ramp spiraling up through the body of the pyramid, invisible from the outside. It was elegant. It explained the missing debris. It even offered an answer for the Grand Gallery, that tall, narrow, scuff-marked passage, as a giant counterweight system for hauling the granite beams into place. For a while, it was the best idea anyone had. And then, physics put it to the test. Because for most of history, there was no way to look inside solid rock without taking it apart. You can't drill through millions of tons of stone hunting for hidden rooms. So the inside stayed a mystery, until a technique called Muon tomography changed everything. The Earth is constantly bombarded by cosmic rays from deep space. When they hit the upper atmosphere, they create showers of subatomic particles called muons. Muons pass straight through solid matter, through rock, through stone, through a pyramid, but not evenly. Dense stone absorbs more of them. Empty space lets more of them through. So if you place detectors inside and around the structure and count the muons arriving from every direction, the hidden empty spaces light up. You build a three-dimensional density map of the inside of a pyramid without touching a single stone. A CT scan of a mountain read by particles that were born light years away. In 2015, an international team called Scan Pyramids did exactly that. Led by Cairo University and a French research institute, they placed muon detectors deep inside the pyramid's existing passages and waited for months, counting particles falling out of the sky at the rate the universe provided them. And in 2017, they published a finding in the journal Nature that should have made headlines around the world. Deep inside the Great Pyramid, above the Grand Gallery, they detected a massive void. Not a crack, not a gap, a cavity over 100 feet long, with a cross-section comparable to the Grand Gallery itself, one of the largest spaces in the entire structure. They called it the Big Void. And the crucial part was how they confirmed it. 3 separate teams, using 3 completely different muon detection methods, nuclear emulsion films, scintillator detectors, and gas-based detectors, built by different institutions in different countries who didn't share their raw data until the end. If it had been a glitch in one machine, the methods would have disagreed. They didn't. Every approach pointed at the same dark shape in the same place. Not similar results. Not roughly compatible. The same void confirmed 3 separate ways. Sit with that. We have been climbing through this pyramid, measuring it, mapping it, writing books about it for over 200 years. And there was a chamber the size of an airliner hiding inside it the entire time. Napoleon's scholars missed it. The Victorian explorers who tunneled through these passages with candles and gunpowder missed it. Every Egyptologist of the 20th century, with all their training, missed it. It took particles from the death of distant stars to reveal a room that was always there. And it wasn't the only thing they found. Behind a gabled stone feature on the pyramid's north face, the same scans revealed a second hidden space, a corridor roughly 9 meters long, with a vaulted ceiling. Sealed behind the outer stones, they threaded a fiber optic camera through a joint between the blocks and looked inside at a passage no human eye had seen since the pyramid was closed 45 centuries ago. The single most studied building on Earth, and it was still hiding rooms from us. But here's what the scan did to the internal ramp theory. If a continuous spiral ramp were really threaded through the body of the pyramid, just under the surface, the scan should show a clean, faint spiral trace running around the structure. It doesn't. What it shows is scattered voids, a big one above the Grand Gallery, the corridor behind the north face, isolated pockets. Not a continuous loop. It doesn't completely kill the internal ramp idea, but it badly weakens it. And that's the pattern with every major theory. The external ramp, no debris. The internal spiral, no continuous trace. The water shaft idea, no canals, no cuttings. Every theory dies the same way. Not because we find something that proves it wrong, because we find nothing at all. Here's where it gets strange. And here is the theory that finally turns that nothing into the answer. It came from a man named Huni Choi, who is not an Egyptologist and not an architect. He spent 10 years obsessively modeling every measurable stone at Giza, thousands of blocks, hand-placed in 3 dimensions. And he wasn't trying to solve the pyramid. He was trying to solve the system that produces a pyramid. His claim sounds insane at first. The Great Pyramid wasn't built up. It was carved down. It was unbuilt. Here's what that means. Before the pyramid, the Giza Plateau was a natural limestone outcrop with small hills. The builders used that landscape. First, they shaved and terraced the high points, turning the hill into a working platform. Then, instead of starting with a pyramid shape, they overbuilt. They raised a rough, gigantic trapezoidal mass of stone with the ramp system built directly into it. And only once that mass reached full height did they start carving it down into the final pyramid hidden inside. And this solves the two problems that kill every other theory. Start with the apex problem, because it is the real villain of this whole story. Every pyramid theory works fine near the bottom. The trouble is always the top. A tiny error at the base explodes into a massive deviation by the time you reach the peak. So the apex is the one place you need total precision, full access to all four edges, and room to work. And it is the exact place where every theory fails you. An external ramp has to be removed or shrunk right when you need it most. An internal ramp loses its turning radius and hauling space the higher it climbs. Look around the world and you'll notice something. Pyramids in other cultures almost always dodge this by having a flat top. Even later Egyptian pyramids lose their tips. The sharp, perfect apex of the Great Pyramid is genuinely one of the rarest and hardest things in all of ancient architecture. It is the reason this pyramid, out of all the pyramids ever built, is the one we call a wonder of the world. Now watch what the carve-down method does to that problem. It flips it upside down. Instead of fighting your way up to a shrinking point, you work downward from a wide, stable platform, and the shape matters enormously. If you built the rough mass as a pyramid, the internal ramp would get steeper and higher as it rose, turning into a death slide for the workers. But a trapezoid spreads outward as it climbs. That gives you a gentle, walkable ramp at a safe slope the whole way up. It gives you a flat, secure working deck right around the apex, the deadliest part of the build. And it gives you full visibility of all four edges as you carve the final geometry down out of the solid block. You don't battle the pyramid shape during construction. You delay the pyramid until the very last step, then release it from the stone like a sculptor freeing a statue. And the missing debris, the fatal flaw of the ramp theories, isn't missing at all. The Great Pyramid is roughly 6 million tons. Choi's model estimates the original stacked mass at around 8 million tons. Carve that down, and you're left with roughly 2 million tons of leftover stone. That stone wasn't lost to time. It was reused, fed into Khufu's other structures, and the smaller pyramids beside it. Each pyramid runs through the same recursive loop, cannibalizing the last. Add up everything circulating through the system, and you get around 14 million tons moving through the plateau, with about 1 million tons left over. And that number weirdly lines up with the mainstream volume estimates for the entire Giza complex. The reason this theory holds together is that it matches how the Egyptians actually behaved, not how we imagine they did. They were obsessive recyclers. They turned broken boats into furniture, broken furniture into smaller objects, and nothing of value was ever simply thrown away. Later, dynasties literally mined older pyramids for stone to raise new buildings. A self-cannibalizing construction engine, where each monument is partly built from the carved-down bones of the last, is not some exotic idea bolted onto Egyptian history. It is one of the most Egyptian things imaginable. And the deeper idea underneath it is older still. Long before anyone thought to draw blueprints, ancient builders shaped the landscape itself into the machine. The terraces, the quarries, the early temple platforms, they all bent the earth into a tool for making something that feels impossible. The carved-down theory simply takes that instinct to its logical extreme. It treats the entire Giza plateau not as a place where 3 pyramids happen to stand, but as a single closed-loop machine that produced them, then consumed the evidence of its own work. And that is the part that solves the biggest flaw in the whole debate: the missing ramps, the missing tools, the missing machinery. We've spent centuries assuming time erased them. The carve-down theory says they were never lost. They were repurposed. The ramp became the pyramid. The leftover mass became the next pyramid. The construction site ate itself. Now, does this prove it? Probably not. And that's worth being honest about, because this story deserves better than hype. Here is the hard truth about pyramid theories. In math or physics, proof is close to absolute. You run an experiment, Anyone on Earth can run it again. And if the result holds, it stands until someone breaks it. But you cannot build the Great Pyramid as a live experiment. You cannot dismantle Khufu to peek at the method. And worse, multiple completely different building methods could all produce the exact same final shape. So, in archaeology, a theory never gets to be absolutely true. The best it can do is become the least wrong answer. It earns that title by predicting what we should find on the ground, and then the traces actually matching. And the carved-down theory has a trace working in its favor. A researcher set out to catalog the casing stones, the outer skin of the pyramids, and documented around 6,000 surviving blocks across 3 faces of the neighboring pyramid of Khafre. He found a repeating pattern: small, tapered stones forming faint vertical seams up each face, the points where 2 separate crews, laying stone at the same time from different directions, met and stitched their work together. And the placement told a story. These seams don't appear at the corners or the dead center, which means they weren't where the work ended. They were where the work began. Multiple crews, starting at multiple points, laying stone simultaneously, then knitting it all into one surface. And critically, all 3 faces show the exact same pattern. If a single giant external ramp had been leaning against one side of the pyramid, you would expect the work to cluster around that side, with the casing built outward from the ramp's edge. Instead, the evidence points to crews working a clean, unobstructed core from a wide, stable deck on every face at once. That is not what a one-ramp build looks like. That is exactly what the carve-down theory predicts. It doesn't prove the theory, but it quietly rules others out. But it leads to one genuinely unsettling thought. Most of these theories fail because we find nothing. No ramp, no spiral, no canals. We've been treating that absence as proof the theories are wrong. But what if the absence is the design? What if, for the Egyptians, a sacred form was not allowed to carry any trace of a human builder? What if they always recycled the construction evidence on purpose, restored the site to purity, and erased every mark that could give the method away? Then, the absence of evidence was never evidence of absence. It was the final step of the build. And if any version of this is true, it means something uncomfortable about the story we tell ourselves. It means a civilization we file under primitive, 4,500 years ago, didn't just stack stone. They engineered an entire landscape into a machine to produce the most precise structure in the ancient world, and then deliberately erased the machine when they were done. It means that for 2 centuries, the experts were certain they'd mapped the inside of this thing, and they were wrong by an entire chamber. If our picture of the most studied monument on Earth is missing a chapter this large, what are we missing about the ruins we've barely looked at? Here is the question that won't let go. The pyramids are one of the last things in the world we cannot just Google into clarity. We can scan them with particles from space, model every stone, catalog every casing block, and still only arrive at the least wrong answer. The Great Pyramid is still standing on the Giza Plateau, exactly where it has stood since before the first word of recorded history was written. And inside it, sealed in darkness, is a void the size of an airliner that no living person has ever entered, holding answers we have not yet found a way to reach. It was built to last. It may have been built to hide how it was built. If this is the kind of buried history that keeps you up at night, watch the next investigation playing on screen right now, because the discovery in that one connects to this in a way you will not see coming.